Good morning and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to do a little how-to on edge tools. What we have here is an axe, a tomahawk, a couple knives, a splitting axe, and a splitting wedge. The two in the middle, the splitting axe and the splitting wedge, don't have sheaths for them, and in order to safely carry a edge tool you need to have a sheath. Today I'm going to make one out of leather for each one of these, and I'm going to walk you through it as I go, so stay tuned and I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Alright, so here's the two edge tools we're going to make sheaths for today. For safety, I went ahead and put a piece of tape over the edges of each one. They are sharp and I don't want to cut myself accidentally. So the materials we need for today's project are top grain leather. This is about an 1/8 inch tooling leather. Okay. We need a pencil, a tape measure, a clamp, a drill with a small drill bit, a roll of sinew, a good sturdy pair of scissors, a piece of beeswax, a brush for applying beeswax, and a piece of board, and of course, most important, is a good cup of coffee. And let's get started. Alright, the first thing we need to do to make this project is to make a pattern. So what we're going to do is we're going to set our splitting wedge down on our piece of paper, and we're going to go ahead and trace. Now I want to keep this edge straight, because if we taper it to match the splitting wedge, we'll never get it on the splitting wedge. So I'm just going to basically trace around. This is going to be a square sheath and hopefully be a friction retention sheath. So now we have the size of the wedge there, and what we want to do is we want to add 1/4 inch all the way around. So we add 1/4 inch on all sides here, and then we'll trace this 1/4 inch onto another, the lines that we've made on this one onto another, and just cut out the lines, and you'll have your welt for your pattern as well as your piece of leather. So we just trace this, okay, and then we take our scissors and we go ahead and cut this pattern out, just the outside edge of it. I leave the lines on mine. A little extra leather makes it easier to sew, and you don't have to worry so much whether you're going to have enough there when you lay it out. So now we take our original pattern, and if I did this dark enough, you'll be able to see it through the paper. So now all we need to do is go ahead and draw in our welt, and we want to cut out two separate patterns. We could use the same pattern and just draw it once on the leather and then cut out the welt that we drew and draw it again, but I find it better just to make the patterns separate, and then you don't have to worry about it. So now we'll just cut out the welt. This one I'm going to go ahead and take the line. I drew it a little bigger than what it needed to be, so okay, we can get rid of that now. I've already done the pattern for the splitting axe. So we're done with the paper once we finish cutting this. Alright, so there we have the welt for our splitting wedge, the pattern for our splitting wedge. We're going to need to make 2 of these and 1 of these. Here's the splitting axe welt and the pattern for the splitting axe sheath. So we're going to unroll the leather. I'm going to clear off a little spot here, and we're going to unroll it and trace these onto a piece of leather and then cut that out.
Does he want me to?
Okay, here we are now. We got our pieces cut out of the leather from our patterns. We have each side and our welts for each piece. Okay, now the first thing we want to do is glue these together. And that's basically to hold it together while we stitch. So what I like to do is I like to just take the welt and some tacky glue. They make all kinds of different glues. You can buy glue at the leather store that's specifically made, but tacky glue, we have it around our house. It works. So I rub it.
It's one of the best.
I rub it all over the welt, and then I take the welt and I like to do the suede sides together first, and I'll just line it up and attach it to that. And you don't need to really push that hard. It's just to hold it together, like I said, until we get to where we're going to sew. So we're going to glue up both welts to the pieces, to the side pieces. Plus tacky glue cleans up easy. It's readily available. You can get it anywhere, any craft store, any sewing store.
And it works for all sorts of materials.
So there's the first half. Make sure your edges are lined up pretty good, especially along the welt here at the back edge. Okay, now we're going to do the tops, and we just want to run us a bead of glue all the way around. A little sloppy there. And we put glue on the welt again. And then we take our top piece, and we're just building a sandwich. Squeeze that down. Okay, any glue that you get on the surface later on is going to have to be rubbed off so that you can seal the leather. Alright, so now we have both sheaths glued together. That's the start. And now we have to lay out for our stitches. For laying out stitches, you can either do this with a tape measure and decide how far you want your stitches spaced and put a mark along the edge of the piece. I got lucky enough to go into a Tandy Leather one day, and they gave me this piece of scrap leather from a pre-punched project, and this is what I use for all my leather. It works real nice because all I have to do is line it up with the edge and then mark each hole and just work my way around the project. So I just mark each one, then I turn it, line it up on the next edge, and if you're following a curved edge, you just do a couple and then you move the pattern out to match the curve. And we'll just go all the way around each piece. If you have two holes close to the edge where these overlap, you're just going to make one hole out of that and go with the one that's closest to where you'd want. Like right here, I have two holes, so I'm going to make one hole there, and I have two holes that are almost together there. Okay, so I have all my holes laid out. And now we're going to take our board. Let's move some of this stuff around. We take our scrap board here, and if you need to, you can clamp it down using the clamp just to keep it from moving. And I use a hand drill that I found at a yard sale, and I just line the drill up, try and keep it perpendicular to your work. And you're just going to drill out every one of these holes and work your way around. And this is what we're going to sew through. So I'm going to go ahead and drill these out, and then I'll get back to you when it's time to stitch them together. now we have our holes all pre-drilled. We have our sewing needles. We actually need 2 sewing needles because we're going to do what's called a saddle stitch. Okay, now to measure your thread, what I found works well is to go a little bit more than 3 times the length of the stitch. So I just follow the material on around, and then I get that measurement, and then I use 3 times that amount. And that should give us plenty of thread, and then a little bit extra, just for good measure. So we take our sinew, and we thread a needle on both sides. So we have 2 needles on there. And then we start about at the 3rd hole, because what we're going to do is we're going to stitch over our start point. And there's a lot of stress at the back ends, so we start by feeding it through, then even up both needles, and now we work backwards. So bring it through from each side. So we go in through one side, then in through the other, and then these first few stitches you want to pull up tight from both sides or it'll slip. So then I hold it down and I stitch from this side, and then from this side again, so that you're crisscrossing the thread inside. Okay, so as you can see, I started here at the 3rd hole and I stitched my way back. Now we're just going to go back through all the way around, and then we're going to stitch back on this side, so we're effectively doubling up the thread at the stress points, which are at the corners of the sheath. So we just work our way around, and we're going every other stitch from one side then the other, and you want to pull these up pretty tight as you go, that way they recess into the leather. You can press the leather down along the stitches using a smooth piece of metal or a skewer or something along those lines, something rounded, so that you're not cutting the leather. And you could actually make a recess that the thread will fall into, but for this project I'm just trying to make sure I get it stitched and that I'm carrying these things in a safe manner with a sheath. So it's just back and forth from one side and then the other with both ends of the thread. And I'm going to keep doing that all the way around. Sometimes you got to make sure you don't get your threads tangled up. And some people will stitch a few stitches and then they'll go in from the other side and stitch that. So they'll actually run 2 or 3 straight stitches and then stitch the other side. I've done that in the past, and somehow I ended up getting mixed up and skipped the stitch, and it makes for a weak spot in the sheath. So I tend to just go each hole individually all the way around the project. Whoops. Like I said, you want to pull it up tight so that the stitch pulls into the leather just slightly and recesses. The outside of these sheaths shouldn't take much abrasion, so if you do have a raised stitch, it shouldn't really matter. The longevity of this strong sinew in the leather will hold up pretty well too. This is an artificial sinew, so it's a basically a nylon with a beeswax coating on it, flat thread. Some people roll their thread to make it round. I find it just turns round on its own as you're trying to work with it, so I skip that step most of the time and just use it flat. It's real easy to thread through these needles when it's flat too. So I mean, I'm putting a lot of pressure on these when I pull them up tight, and you want to make sure you do the same. You're trying to make these stitches good and tight so the leather stretches and the thread stays tight when you fit this, because you're going to form fit these onto your edge tools. So we're just going back and forth.